What's going on, everybody? It's Joe, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeper Sunday. So for those of you that don't know, Sleeper Sunday is a series I came up with showcasing fun hidden decks you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what can be done to make the deck better, and of course a few replays to see the deck in action. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the winner of this month's poll, Gemknight FTK. So Gemknight is an aggro OTK style deck, full of mostly earth monsters, with rock being the most common typing, focusing on normal monsters in combination with effect monsters, and this gimmick actually extends to the Gemini mechanic, though the cards aren't typically played in most Gemknight builds. The Gemknight archetype was released in Photon Shockwave back in November of 2011, but it was also a part of the dual terminal machines that no longer see service. It has a fusion-focused extra deck that typically requires specific names or a specific type or attribute alongside a Gemknight monster. And I know I did say that it is an OTK style deck, however, it is going to be focused on the FTK, which is the most notable variant of Gemknight to ever see relevance, and that is because of Gemknight Lady Lapis Lazuli, which I'm going to get out of the way now. So she is a level 5 Earth Rock fusion, 2400 attack and 1000 defense. She requires Gemknight Lapis specifically, which we will get to, and any Gemknight monster. She must first be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials, and you can only special summon her once per turn, and then once per turn you can send a Gemknight monster from your main or extra deck to the graveyard, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each special summon monster on the field. So of course you're going to be doing a lot of damage on the very first turn by doing 500 for each special summon monster on the field, but it also comes into note that they do have another boss monster, which you'll probably be able to point out immediately if you've ever looked at the ban list in your life. They have another boss monster that allows you to basically do this again, meaning that you don't have to worry about the restriction that you can only summon her once, and so that's what lets you FTK in the first place. But starting us off with the deck list, what better way to start than with the normal monsters? So we have 3 copies of Gemknight Lapis and 2 copies of Gemknight Tourmaline. So Gemknight Lapis, of course, is the one that is needed for the Gemknight Lady Lapis Lazuli, so she is one of the most important cards in the deck because you need to see her in order to actually access your FTK. Other than that though, she's not too special or anything, but you do have a lot of ways to recycle your normal monsters, so having the normal monsters in the deck isn't that bad. We also have 2 copies of Gemknight Tourmaline, which is a Thunder, so it actually has a lot less synergy with the deck than I would like it to have. However, it is a level 4 and it is still an Earth and everything like that. Plus, it is a normal monster that can synergize in other different ways that we will get to later. So speaking of ways to recycle our normal monsters, we have 3 copies of Gemknight Lazuli. Gemknight Lazuli says if she's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target a normal monster in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. So as you'll probably see, because it was a dual terminal archetype, it is pretty damn old, not to mention, 2011. So there is actually a heavy lack of hard once per turn clauses on most of these cards, which is pretty damn good overall, especially for a card like Gemknight Lazuli, which you're probably going to be looping multiple times per turn in order to keep getting your normal monster resources back. In a similar sense, we also have 2 copies of Gemknight Obsidian that says if this card is sent from your hand to your graveyard, you can target a level 4 or lower normal monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. So it's definitely a bit more specific than Lazuli, hence why we're only playing 2, not to mention his level isn't the greatest thing without being a normal monster himself, of course. However, he's still a fantastic card because, if you pitch him off of something like Doki Doki, which we'll get into, if you pitch him off of a Gemknight Fusion or some other way, if you just send him from your hand to the graveyard period, you just get to freely summon any Gemknight normal monster, or not Gemknight normal monster, but just normal monster period from your graveyard, so that is fantastic for getting extra things on board. We also have 3 copies of Crystal Rose. So Crystal Rose is a level 2 light rock, which is definitely different from the Earths that we've been seeing, that says once per turn you can send a Gemknight or Melodious monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and if you do, this card's name becomes the Sense monster's name until the end phase. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish a fusion monster from your graveyard to special summon this card in defense position, and you can only use this effect of Crystal Rose once per turn. Also, I have realized that I have been saying these way too fast, so I'll try to slow down a little bit. But if you're wondering why it says Gemknight or Melodious, it has something to do with the anime. In Arc 5, there's 2 characters. One of the main characters uses Melodious, and one of her rival characters, I think her name's Jasmine or something, she uses Gemknights, and then this is to signify their bond or something when they become friends. I don't know, but it's 900,000 times better for Gemknight than it is for Melodious. But keep in mind that the second effect is a hard once per turn, the effect to banish a fusion from your grave to special in defense, but the first effect is only a soft once per turn, so you can actually get a lot of free dumps from your hand or deck, which is pretty great, because sending from hand can trigger Obsidian, and sending from deck can trigger Lazuli. Hey, you want to join the recording? If you would sit in my lap, I wouldn't mind letting you be in on the recording, silly. But yes, it is fantastic at triggering your names like Lazuli or Obsidian, but it's also just good for dumping things like Lapis and then copying the name, so that it can not only become a Gemknight for your later plays, but also specifically be Lapis in case you need to go into a Lapis Lazuli with her. The graveyard recursion effect is also fantastic, by the way, because a lot of the time you're going to be going into a more generic Gem Knight name other than just the Lady Lapis, so you'll usually have one in graveyard that you can banish, or you have another way to send from your extra deck to the graveyard to set this up, being in the form of Brilliant Rose. And Brilliant Rose is actually from the newest wave of support that came out in Power of the Elements, which I totally forgot to say that their most recent wave of support came out in Power of the Elements in 2022. Sorry, this script is all over the place if you couldn't tell. But it is also a level 2 light rock that says it's always treated as a Gem Knight card, meaning you don't have to copy a name like Crystal Rose. But it says you can discard a Gem Knight or Melodious card to special summon this card from your hand, and that is a hard once per turn. But as a soft once per turn, you can send a Gem Knight or Melodious monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, and until the end phase, this card's name, type, and attribute become the same as that monster sent to the grave. So if you couldn't tell, this is also a fantastic card, and basically the only playable one for the FTK version of the build, from the most recent wave of support, mainly just due to how good the effects are, because let's see, being treated as a Gem Knight card at all times is fantastic when it comes to making your Link monster, which we will get into later. Being able to discard any Gem Knight or Melodious card to special it from your hand is also really good, because it's free swarming when you need more special summon monsters on board in order to actually do more burn, but it also triggers things like Obsidian because it sends for cost. Just keep in mind, because it sends for cost, it does not trigger Lazuli, which is really unfortunate. And then sending from your extra deck sets up Crystal Rose or sets up a Lady Lapis in your graveyard for when you may need it, which again, another thing we will get into later if you don't know. And all around, it's just a fantastic card for helping with the FTK variant of the deck, though it is very welcome in the other builds like the OTK build. I honestly think Brilliant Rose, I like it more than Crystal Rose, because while Crystal Rose can dump a Lapis to copy the name, Brilliant Rose actually has a way of special summoning itself, which, like, from the hand at least, so you don't have to, like, worry about bricking on a random Crystal Rose that you can't do anything with, though they are best when they work hand in hand together, even if Brilliant Rose can't discard Crystal Rose, which is annoying. So another engine that we're playing in here to facilitate more field presence is the Adamancipator cards. I won't really mention much about them. They were released in Secret Slayers in 2020, like, who cares? But we have 3 Researcher, 3 Seeker, and 3 Analyzer. These are very important, not for Link summoning, but rather for very, very important synchro plays that we will get into. Like, basically, you almost always need to see at least one of these in order for your combos to go off, which is why we're playing 3 of each, and we have a bunch of different ways to go into them. Speaking of the Adamancipators, one of the best cards to actually get off of them is Doki Doki, because not only is it a card that gives you another free body on board for field presence, but it also puts a second one on board on top of itself, while also potentially getting things out of your hand like Gem Knight Obsidian so you can trigger the effects. Just keep in mind, if you're playing on EDO, don't make the mistake of trying to hit defense position by habit. I put way too many monsters in face down defense position with this card. So you can't have a normal monster deck without 3 copies of Rescue Rabbit. So this card actually has much more applications than you may think, not only allowing you to get multiple Gem Knight names on board like your Lapis in order to get the Lapis names, while also being able to go into your Link plays, but it's also fantastic for pulling a Dino Rabbit and summoning 2 level 4s in order to access a rank 4, being the Gallant Granite, which we will just talk about kinda later. But this card is probably the best normal summon in the deck alongside Analyzer because it can help you with your plays a lot. Back to the Gem Knight side of things though, we have 3 copies of Gem Knight Fusion. Gem Knight Fusion is the archetypal Gem Knight Fusion spell that's literally just a polymerization. There's nothing too special there. However, it says if it's in your graveyard, you can banish a Gem Knight monster from your graveyard to add it to your hand, and that is not a hard once per turn, meaning that you can basically use Gem Knight Fusion as many times as you want, because you'll always have at least 1 or 2 Gem Knights in your graveyard in order to banish, because the amount of materials you'll be using to fusion summon. Typically, you don't want to hit your normal monsters out of your grave with it, you're just going to hit things like Lazuli or Obsidian, basically just cards that you no longer care about in order to add it back so you can keep extending into your fusion plays. We also have 3 copies of Adamancipator Signs in the deck. You know, just being able to have a non-once per turn monster reborn for any rock is fantastic. It's okay for the second effect for stacking, but only if you haven't used that Adamancipator yet, which I don't really know how that'll happen unless you like discard with Doki Doki or something, but mostly you're going to be summoning back either a big boss monster to reuse the effect again, or you're going to be summoning back like a Gem Knight monster in order to go into your Link plays. Similar to the vein of Rescue Rabbit though, we also have 3 copies of Unexpected Die. Controlling no monsters to summon literally any of these from your deck is fantastic. This is really good to open in tandem with something like Adamancipator Analyzer, because you can normal summon the Analyzer after you use the Unexpected Die to summon a Tourmaline to not only get the Analyzer effect, but also go into the Gallant Granite. And then finally, the strangest card in the deck is definitely the inclusion of 1 copy of Black Garden. but keep in mind that you need a lot of special summon monsters in order to go for the kill, because you can only summon Lapis Lazuli once per turn, and their boss monster that copies effects is only at 1. And so you basically need to be able to do it in like 2 shots most of the time, sometimes 3 with the Adamantipator signs, and if you get lucky like the Brilliant Rose, but most of the time it's specifically going to be 2 hits. And so you're going to need a lot of special summon monsters. So having access to the Black Garden, which is searchable, means that you can basically get 2 monsters for the price of 1 summon every time you summon a monster, and it really doesn't do anything outside of that. I mean, you don't use a second effect or anything like that, and you don't care about the stat halving. You literally just care about getting as many special summon monsters on board as possible so that you can have the maximum amount of burn. But that is it for the main deck. Probably the fastest I've ever explained a main deck when it comes to a Sleeper Sunday video, because most of these cards are self-explanatory like the Adamanticators. But let's go ahead and get on to the extra deck. So we already talked about Lady Lapis Lazuli. We also have 1 copy of Gem Knight Prismara. So Gem Knight Prismara is a fusion that says it requires a Gem Knight monster and a Thunder type monster, you know, the only Thunder we have being Tourmaline. And it says must first be fusion summoned, and once per turn you can send a Gem Knight card from your hand to the graveyard to target a face-up card on the field and destroy that target. So you really don't care much about the effect, even though it is pretty nice overall when you're trying to break boards going second if you're forced to. You mainly just care about the fact that it's a generic Gem Knight that requires a Thunder, so it's an easy way to get Gem Knight Tourmaline out of your hand instead of going for something that requires a rock. Speaking of generic though, the most generic target we have in our extra deck that I love very, very much is Gem Knight Zirconia. It also gives me a lot of nostalgia because this is one of my first fusion cards. I loved this card. But it is just a simple Gem Knight monster plus rock type monster as the materials. It is a non-effect monster, meaning that it works, I believe, with some of your normal monster things. I don't know. Never mind, no it doesn't, I do not take that, that is a lie. I forgot non-effect monsters are not normal monsters, but regardless, it doesn't really matter. The point is that not having no effect doesn't matter. You literally just care about the fusion materials, meaning that you can get it for free on your board to get an additional body on board using things from like your hand, or to trigger something like an Obsidian, or get more things off of Black Garden. Basically, it's one of the main things you'll be banishing from your grave off of Crystal Rose. But finally, the main thing that makes the FTK possible that isn't Lady Lapis is the 1 copy limited of Gem Knight Master Diamond. So Gem Knight Master Diamond is a ridiculous card. It is an Earth Rock fusion, level 9, whatever, 2900 attack and 2500 defense, but it also gains 100 attack for each gem monster in your graveyard, and it requires 3 Gem Knight monsters, so it's actually very generic. I wish a lot more fusion archetypes just had 3 archetypal requirements for their materials, but it must first be fusion summoned, and once per turn you can banish a level 7 or lower Gem Knight fusion monster from your graveyard, and until the end phase this card's name becomes that monster's, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. So if you couldn't tell, the main way to go with this deck is you're going to summon your Lady Lapis Lazuli, burn with her effect, put her in grave by any means, either by fusion summoning using her or by linking her off, and basically just summoning Master Diamond, banishing it from graveyard to copy the effect, and then just use the effect to burn for the final piece of game. Keep in mind this is a soft once per turn, hence why the card is limited. However, if you send a second Lady Lapis off of the Lapis Lazuli, its effect when you copy it, or off of your Brilliant Rose, and you have an Adamantipator Signs, you can summon back the Master Diamond from your graveyard and then use the effect again because you had the second Lapis Lazuli in the grave without having to special summon it twice. So there are ways to use Master Diamond more than once per turn, even though it is limited. However, it is definitely very frustrating, and one of the main things that makes the FTK a lot harder to pull off. Granted, that's probably for the greater good, considering FTKs aren't that great for the game. But I did mention earlier that Black Garden is searchable, of course being by Garden Rose Maiden. Literally don't care about any of the effects except for that on special summon you add a Black Garden from deck or graveyard to hand. Basically, you're going to be using your Adamanticators, and like any ways to get into this being basically Analyzer plus Lazuli or Researcher Seeker plus either of your level 3s. You're basically just going to be trying to pump out Garden Rose Maiden as fast as possible to get access to your Black Garden so that you can easily go for your extra bodies on board. You're not always going to be able to pull off an FTK though, so if you prefer to go more for like a combo route, you can absolutely do that. With things like an Acheria Beast, still one of the most broken cards in the entire game if you can make it. Just infinite spell negates that also mills your deck is pretty fantastic, especially because you can put things like Crystal Rose in your graveyard. We also have Adamantipator Risen Raptite. This is just extra extension, especially when you have Black Garden. It can give you extra bodies on board, but it's mainly like one of your last ditch effort things to like try and get bodies on board. We also have one Adamantipator Risen Dragite, so unfortunately we don't play any waters for this, for the negate at least. However, we can still get the excavate the top 5 cards of your deck to non-target return your opponent's cards to the hand equal to the amount. So basically this card is really good for going second because you can just make this using like an Analyzer Tourmaline or like literally whatever, and you can just excavate the top 5. You play almost exclusively rock monsters in your deck aside from like Rescue Rabbit and Tourmaline, and so basically you can get a bunch of bounces for free and they do not target. Plus you can just place the excavated cards on the bottom so it's not like you lose them. And what I was talking about earlier when it comes to your link plays is 2 copies of Gemknight Phantom Quartz. This is one of the first, I think it's called the Vrains packs or whatever, basically the sets that gave us cards like Hulk and all of the other broken legacy support link monsters, and this is no exception because it's a link 2 with 2 down pointing arrows. It requires 2 gem monsters, and it says on link summon you can add a Gemknight card from your deck to your hand, literally any Gemknight card. And then you can pay 1,000 life points to fusion summon a Gemknight fusion monster from your extra deck by shuffling materials in your possession listed on it into your deck that are banished or in the graveyard, but it cannot attack directly this turn, and you can only use this effect once per turn. I'm sorry, you can only use each effect once per turn. But ignoring the fact that literally any fusion deck that needs legacy support would kill for a card like this, this card is just so good for this strategy. On summon, being able to add any Gemknight card is basically the easiest way you're going to access your Gemknight fusion without hard opening it. And then being able to fusion summon using your dead materials, especially with like a banished Zirconia or like any of your recyclers that are banished or in graveyard from your Gemknight fusion, you can just put them all back and then get a free boss monster, typically going to be the Master Diamond off of the second effect. And it's just such a good way to get your bodies on board, only for the low cost of 1,000 life points, and then not attacking directly just doesn't even matter. Basically, when it comes to your FTKs, like, it relies on how easy are you going to be able to get out both Garden Rose and Phantom Quartz, and then you can just basically go off from there. We also have IP Masquerena for combo reasons, as well as being able to put things in the graveyard without having to go into like something big. We also have Nightmare Unicorn in order to go off of for the IP Masquerena, and then we have Appaloosa Above the Goddess because it's another combo endboard piece, and again, you can make it with the IP. And then finally, we have the 1 Gallant Granite. So I did mention this earlier, you can just use 2 level 4s, typically the Tourmalines off of your Rescue Rabbit, but mainly you're going to be using this to add something like your Adamantipator Researcher to start going into your Adamantipator plays early without having to like rely on hard drawing them. That is it for the actual cards we do play. Some things that you can play or have seen play. You can play the Adamantipator Crystal Dragite. This will not only put a water in your grave for your Dragite, but it's also a really good way to get a free draw. I just don't want to potentially end up bricking on this card. We also have Adamantipator Risen Leonite, which I think I might have played at one point, I do not remember. But basically, you can excavate the top 5 of your deck and then add any Adamantipator card from them to your hand. So this is really good not just for adding extenders like Seeker or Researcher, but it's mainly really good for Adamantipator Signs because this is a free extension on top of having the Leonite. So it's really good in case you need to like revive your Master Diamond and you really need to dig for the signs. Another one of the cards that came out of the Power of the Elements wave is Gemknight Quartz. So this card is only partially good, so that's why I don't really play it. It says if your opponent controls a monster, you can discard this card to set a fusion continuous spell from your deck, but you're locked into Gemknights from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. But if it's used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banish, you can add a Gemknight monster from your graveyard to your hand, except Gemknight Quartz, and you can only use each effect of Gemknight Quartz once per turn. So ignoring the fact that the first effect is kind of like defunct considering that Brilliant Fusion is currently banned, the second effect is the main reason that I did try this card out at 1. However, it ended up just being a worse version of Lazuli because yeah, it could add any Gemknight from grave to hand and not just a normal monster, but it just didn't really come up enough because it's not like it has 2 good effects, it just has the 1. There's also Gem Armadillo, which is basically something that would take up your normal summon. It says when it's normal summon, you can add a Gemknight monster from your deck to your hand. It's definitely not a bad effect, however, you'd rather use your normal summon for something like Analyzer or Doki Doki, or like something in order to start actually getting your plays going, instead of just getting an extra material potentially in order to access like your Lapis or something. If it added any gem card period, I would absolutely be playing it because then you could add the Gemknight Fusion, but just adding Gemknight monsters isn't going to be enough. A card that honestly I'm really considering playing right now is Gemknight Seraphinite. So this used to be the best target off of Brilliant Fusion, and honestly I feel like like this card should have went instead of it. But it requires a Gem Knight or a Light Monster, and it says it must first be fusion summoned with the above materials, and it says during your main phase you get an additional normal summon or set in addition to your regular one. And so basically, because now you have 2 Light Monsters in your deck instead of just the one that you used to have off of only the Crystal Rose, now you also have the Brilliant Rose, you have a lot more ways to go into it, so it's a lot more generic. Actually, honestly, this is a lot easier to go into than Prismara, so I'm kind of tempted. But getting the additional normal summon is also fantastic because you can just normal summon an Analyzer, you can normal summon a Doki Doki, hell, a Rescue Rabbit. Like, you can actually access some really good extra plays while also going into a free Gem Knight monster. Honestly, I'm very heavily considering replacing Prismara with this. I might do that after this video is done. Another card that we used to play but is not worth it anymore is Absorb Fusion. It says add a Gem Knight card from your deck to your hand, and then you can apply this effect. Fusion summon a Gem Knight fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing materials from your hand or field, and you can only activate 1 per turn, but you're locked into Gem Knights the entire turn that you use it. So the main reason that we used to play this card as a one-of was because of Verte, because you basically would go into Verte in case you needed like a last-ditch Master Diamond. You would dump this to add a Gem Knight card and then fusion summon it into the Master Diamond, and you'd be able to avoid the lock essentially because Verte avoided locks. But now Verte is no longer a card, therefore you cannot really use the Absorb Fusion very reliably. Brilliant Fusion is here mainly because I just want to showcase exactly how broken it is for the deck. Obviously, being able to fusion summon using materials from your deck is fantastic, especially for an FTK. The attack and defense going to 0 does not matter, and then discarding a spell could actually be pretty neat because it can get you some banished things because you can discard a Gem Knight Fusion. But yeah, Brilliant Fusion even at 1 copy will like fix this deck so much. And then finally for optional cards, we have Link Spider and Imduck the World Chalice Dragon. So basically you have 2 different normal monsters you can go into these with, and they can either function as extension or they can function as like a little bit of board breaking, I guess. But honestly, neither of them I feel like are worth it, but they are options you can consider. So that is it for the deck list. I'm sorry that it seemed very rushed. Like, the amount of stutters I had in this, you will not believe. I think I should have taken a nap before this instead of after. But I'm going to go ahead and get onto the replays. They're going to be a little bit different this time, trust me. I know it's something that people have been wanting for a little bit, but it'll only probably apply to this video. And you're probably very confused, but you'll understand what I mean in just a second. But let's go ahead and get right into the replays. I know, you're probably very confused as to why I'm still here, huh? So people have been asking me to do like actual commentary or do like live games on Sleeper Sundays instead of just having the sound replays or the music replays, sorry. That's not something that I plan on doing. That is a lot of work, and I can barely remember what I had for breakfast this morning, much less what happened through my mind like in a replay from a week ago. However, because this is an FTK deck, and so it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually get the replays. You have no idea what hell I went through for the Flower Guardian FTK one. I figured I might as well just do a couple of live hands to showcase how you're supposed to FTK, because it is very non-linear, rather than just showcasing some random ass replays. But looking at this hand here, it's pretty interesting to say the least. I think we'll start by normal summoning Doki Doki and then activating the effect. Probably hitting the Seeker here, so that we can summon a Researcher from our deck. Remember to summon an attack if you're doing this on EDO, otherwise you're going to get screwed. But we're going to activate the Researcher to, let's see if we can hit anything here. Okay, hitting a Lapis is very good. And see, honestly, I feel like if this Crystal Rose were a Brilliant Rose instead, we'd actually be in a really good spot here. But unfortunately, this did not seem to be the best opening hand. We typically need a little bit more extension here. So I feel like this is a certified Nichiria Beast pass moment. Definitely not the pinnacle of what the deck can do, but it seems to be what we can only do for now. Alright, so this next test hand actually looks a lot more favorable. We're going to start by normal summoning our Rescue Rabbit and activating the effect to summon 2 copies of Gem Knight Tourmaline directly from our deck to our field. This will not only give us 2 level 4s for free onto our field to go into this Gallant Granite, but it'll also access some free normal monsters to trigger our effects such as Lazuli or Obsidian with. So let's go ahead and activate the effect of Gallant Granite. We're going to detach the Tourmaline in order to add the Adamantipator Researcher. And basically what we're looking for here is, I think the only thing we really need is a level 3 off of this, so we can go into our Garden Rose Maiden. So we're going to use the Adamantipator Researcher. There's our level 3 right there, the Gem Knight Obsidian. Can we hit a Lapis instead? Nope, we got the Obsidian. That's perfectly fine. I think we'll still be amazing with this hand because we have the Adamantipator Signs for extension. But now we're going to go into our Garden Rose Maiden here. Effective Garden Rose Maiden, of course, we're going to be adding our Black Garden, activating our Black Garden so that we don't forget to do it. And then now we are going to activate the Brilliant Rose in hand, discarding the Gem Knight Fusion to special summon it to our field. Black Garden is a mandatory effect, by the way, which is kind of annoying because that means not only can you not chain block, but even if all the zones are full, it's still going to attempt to activate. Very annoying there, I know, but like it's not really something you can help. But let's go ahead and use the effect of Brilliant Rose here. What do we want to send to the grave? We'll be using our Adamantipator Signs already just to go for the Phantom Quartz, so we don't really need to dump a Lady Lapis, so I'm just going to go ahead and dump, like... Actually, we aren't doing a Crystal Rose shenanigan, so I think I will dump a Lady Lapis just as a precaution. But now we're going to activate the Gemnite Fusion. Keep in mind we can banish any Gemnite from our grave, so I'm going to banish the Obsidian to get it back for free. I'm now going to activate Adamantipator Signs to summon back our Adamantipator Researcher here. And y'all, I think I might have accidentally screwed this up a little bit. However, it is definitely a never punish game because we're just going to go ahead and activate Gemnite Fusion using the Adamantipator Researcher and actually maybe we'll use the Gallant Granite and the Gemnite Lapis to go into Gemnite Zirconia, triggering Black Garden again. I'm then going to activate the Gemnite Fusion, banishing probably a Tourmaline because we don't need both in Graveyard to add itself back to our hand. Now we are going to go ahead and take our 2 Gemnite monsters because Brilliant Rose is always treated as a Gemnite card, and as well it has copied the name, I believe. And now Black Garden will not only trigger in a new chain, but so will our Phantom Quartz in order to add any Gemnite card from our deck to our hand. I'm going to go ahead and add a... So we'll probably have to hard use the effect of Phantom Quartz here in order to actually properly get access to our Lady Lapis. So I'm going to go ahead and add a Gemnite Obsidian from our deck to our hand. We're now going to activate the effect of our Phantom Quartz, paying 1,000 life points in order to summon our Lady Lapis Lazuli. I'm going to use, of course, the Lapis and probably the Zirconia in order to get it back for later, just in case, to go into our Lady Lapis Lazuli. This will trigger Black Garden to summon another Rose token, and now we are going to activate Lady Lapis, dumping a Lazuli from deck. This will do the first 4,500 burn. Look how much burn that is. But it's also going to dump a Gemnite Lazuli from our deck to our graveyard. I need to calm down. And we're going to add back our Gemnite Tourmaline for absolutely free. And now we have counted 4 total Gemnites, but we only need 3 here. We're going to use all 3 of these for a Gemnite Master Diamond. Black Garden will mandatory trigger, and I might as well trigger Gemnite Obsidian for fun to summon back our Gemnite Tourmaline here. And now we're going to Master Diamond, banishing our Lady Lapis Lazuli, followed by Master Diamond, sending another Lazuli as a precaution, just to burn for the last 5k, which will be our first FTK of these replays. Looking at this opening hand here as well that I just got, this is really ridiculous looking, not gonna lie. I'm gonna start off with Unexpected Die here. I think I'm gonna go for just a basic Gemnite Tourmaline, and let's see. If we discard the Lapis, we can specially Brilliant Rose and then go for Researcher Seeker. I think that might be a pretty good play overall. So I think I'm going to, because I don't want to waste my normal summon here, so I think I'm going to use Brilliant Rose, discarding Gemnite Lapis to summon the Brilliant Rose from hand. And then I'm then going to activate the effect of Brilliant Rose to send the Gemnite Lady Lapis Lazuli. And now, because we control a rock monster, otherwise, if this were a rock monster, I would have just activated this outright, but we had to summon the Brilliant Rose first. But I am going to summon Adamantipator Researcher, and just in case our opponent has like a Ghost Ogre or something, I'm going to summon the Seeker as well. But now I'm going to activate the effect of Adamantipator Researcher. Ooh, we hit a level 3 there, beautiful, and a Lapis for our level 3 actually. That's even better because we need as many normal monsters in grave. Well, not need, but we want as many normal monsters in grave as possible, not only so we don't draw them later, but also because we can have so many recursion effects. But now I'm going to go straight with our Researcher and our Lapis we summoned off of her into our Garden Rose Maiden. Activating the effect of Garden Rose Maiden, we're going to be adding the Black Garden. Activating the Black Garden, of course, before we do anything else. And I think before I even use the Seeker, I want to go these 2 into the Gemnite Phantom Quartz, triggering Chainlink 1 Black Garden, of course, and Chainlink 2 Phantom Quartz, adding the Gemnite Fusion because we have no access to it otherwise. But now Black Garden will make a token, and I'm going to activate the Adamantipator Seeker. If we can hit a Gemnite here, that would be pretty baller. Crystal Rose, actually, probably the best thing we could have hit off of this. Summoning the Crystal Rose to our side of the field, and then putting all of these on the bottom in any order, it doesn't really matter. Black Garden will then trigger to make another Rose token. Crystal Rose will then activate. We're going to dump Gemnite Lazuli to change its name into Lazuli, but it'll also trigger the Lazuli to add back our Gemnite Lapis. So that means now we have our Gemnite Fusion live to use the Crystal Rose and the Lapis to go into a Lady Lapis Lazuli. Triggering Black Garden, of course. Now let's see how many monsters we have on board. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if we burned here with the Lady Lapis, we'd actually only get a total of 3,500 damage. Sorry, 7 times 530 is 3,500. So we're now going to activate the Crystal Rose, banishing the Lady Lapis Lazuli in order to summon itself back, which will not only give that body on board, but also put another Rose token down, and we can use the Crystal Rose to dump another Gem Knight Lazuli, who will then trigger to add back a Lapis. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and use Gem Knight Fusion now, banishing one of the Lazulis just to get itself back to the hand, and then we can trigger the Lady Lapis Lazuli in order to dump our third Lazuli to burn for 45 instead of 35. Triggering Lazuli once more, we're going to add back another Lapis. Non-once per turn effects are just fantastic. And while we could use the effect of Phantom Quartz here in order to make our Master Diamond, I think I'm just going to go ahead and use the Lapis Lazuli in the 2 Lapis in my hand in order to summon the Master Diamond outright with the Gem Knight Fusion. And then, of course, all it is now is a matter of activating your Master Diamond, banishing the Lady Lapis Lazuli, and then using the effect to send anything to burn for the remaining 5,000 for game. So this might be the final test hand here. This is definitely a bit of an awkward one, but I want to see what I can do overall. So I'm going to start by normal summoning Doki Doki, activating the effect of Doki Doki, discarding Gem Knight Lapis in order to summon another copy of it from the deck. I'm then going to activate Adamancipator's Sign, summoning back Gem Knight Lapis, in order to link both of them off into our Gem Knight Phantom Quartz. Activating the Phantom Quartz, this is going to, of course, add our Gem Knight Fusion from our deck to our hand. You can also add Brilliant Rose, but Gem Knight Fusion is just the better way to go overall. But I'm going to activate the Gem Knight Fusion, fusing both of these into a Gem Knight Zirconia, triggering both effects of Obsidian because it is also not a once per turn, and where I'm going to summon back both of our Gem Knight Lapises. I'm going to activate the Gem Knight Fusion to just go ahead and banish the Gem Knight Obsidian and add this back to my hand. And now, let's see. I feel like we can go these two maybe into an IP Masquerena, specifically using one of the Lapis instead of using the Doki Doki, because while it does get rid of a Gem Knight on our board, it does make it quite annoying when we're trying to go into Apple because she does require different names. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay 1,000 for the Gem Knight Phantom Quartz to summon a Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli by shuffling back the banished Obsidian and the Lapis in our graveyard. So this is definitely not going to do nearly as much damage as otherwise. Also, very quickly, I'm actually going to turn these into an Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess just to get that Lapis engraved. But we're going to use the Lapis Lazuli to dump a Lazuli and burn for 15, so we will still be in the life lead here. And it's also going to add back the Gem Knight Lapis from our graveyard to our hand because we dumped a Lazuli. So this is definitely not the most intimidating end board, being Appaloosa and then the IP to go into the Unicorn with the Lady Lapis Lazuli, but we also did that little bit of extra burn there, so if we were to, like, say, go into time or something, this would actually apply there. And not to mention, it is still a total of, like, 4 disruptions, because you have the 3 Appo Negates and the Unicorn Shuffle, and all you have to do is just discard the Gem Knight Fusion off of the Unicorn, because you can just add the Fusion back by banishing the Lazuli. And then the top deck, it looks like, would be Brilliant Rose, and honestly, that's really fantastic because that can help you go for the rest of the game, potentially. That is going to be it for the replays, quote-unquote. I mean, they were mostly just live test hands. I hope you did enjoy. It is definitely a bit of a more weird format for me to actually do these live, rather than actually just going back and doing replays, because that makes it a lot simpler, especially on my throat. However, I do hope you did enjoy and that it was worth it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you back in the rest of the video. So, now that we have the replays out of the way, let's go ahead and get right onto the strength section. So honestly, it's surprisingly consistent overall in what it does. Like, even though you have to use typically most, if not all, of the cards in your hand in order to do it, it is such a broad combination, especially when it comes to RNG off of your Adamancipators, that you can just basically take almost any mishmash of a decent hand, combine it with a sprinkle of luck, and you can just basically do it with almost any type of hand. The deck also has the ability to make a regular combo end board in case you realize you can't FTK. Again, you can make things like Appo, IP, you can go for Nap Beast. If you don't want to play the Dragite, you can play something like a Borreload Savage Dragon, so you can go like, make Appo using the Phantom Quartz, and then attach the Phantom Quartz to the Savage Dragon. Basically, even though that's not the best at doing it, and honestly a deck like pure Adamancipator would probably just be better at it, you can at least go for something in case you don't go for the actual kill. As I mentioned earlier, almost every card in the Gem Knight archetype lacks a once per turn restriction, at least the older stuff, which allows for a very strong resource game and resource loop, utilizing things like Lazuli and Obsidian. Finally, generic rock support is always very helpful for the deck, and it'll continue to add on to what it can play, and how it can play through different disruptions, as well as making certain end boards, so long as rocks just continue to get new cards, especially along the lines of the Adamanticators. But with every strength, there is at least one weakness, so starting off, it's still lacking the best card in the archetype due to the Forbidden and Limited list, and then their second best card is also limited to 1. Like, Brilliant Fusion makes it a lot more consistent at what it does, whether that be good or bad in the eye of the beholder, and then having Master Diamond only at 1 makes playing through a mediocre hand even worse, and requires you to have very specific hands in order to utilize him more than once. It also harms any build of Gem Knight as opposed to just the FTK, which is pretty unfortunate, especially because in the context of Brilliant Fusion, it was a lot of other decks that were making it die for its sins rather than Gem Knight itself. While certain hands can extend pretty well, like most FTKs, a single hand trap, especially a well-timed one, specifically on like your Rose Maiden or your Phantom Quartz, it'll completely ruin your day and then leave you a sitting duck in the water, because not only does the hand trap stop your FTK, it is very likely stopping you from actually going into anything at all. So while your deck does have a great amount of synergy involving them, both the normal monsters and the cards surrounding them, such as like Obsidian and Lazuli, can end up clogging up your hand when you would have preferred to see like the Adamanticator engine, or like some form of extension, or like Doki Doki, or like anything like that, because you'd much rather have those cards than just random things in your hand that synergize with the normal monsters, because normal monsters have never really been something that's too great. So while the deck is not that inconsistent, bad hands are just completely unplayable. Like, there's sometimes when you get a hand of like Crystal Rose, Obsidian, Lapis, Black Garden, and Lazuli, where you literally can't do anything due to not having the ability to put more than one body on board. And then finally, there's no real set combos. Again, you kind of just have to use like everything in your hand or a set amount of things in your hand to just randomly hodgepodge something together and then finally go for the FTK. Like, most of your hands are simply just looking at it for what it is, playing it out, and then half the time coping on your Adamanticator digs, and usually using up most or all of the initial resources that you may have had. So how are we going to make Gem Knight better? And keep in your seat for this one, because this is probably the longest section for how to make the deck better that I've had for like in the entirety of Sleeper Sunday so far. So starting off, please unban Brilliant Fusion. Like, limiting it to 1 would make it to where most decks, if any nowadays, would prefer not to risk having it and the Gem Knight name just to get a single body on board, even if it is searchable via the Predaplant engine, which also requires another Garnet to be played in the main deck in the form of the Darlingtonia Cobra. And no, Tier Limit would not play the Aqua one. They have like a million different ways to send their tier names to grave anyways. Like, half of them don't even play Foolish Burial, y'all. But even just a single copy of Brilliant Fusion would be fantastic for the deck's power and consistency, FTK build or not. And with Fairy Tail Snow being gone, again, it's not like we don't have to worry about Seraphonite or anything really anymore. And hell, it'll even benefit the going second builds of Gem Knight, as they'd have a more valid reason to play Quartz since it fetches the Brilliant Fusion directly from the deck without being too broken due to its restrictions. Another more generic fusion monster would also be much appreciated, because Zirconia is really good, don't get me wrong, but something that simply states like 2 Gem Knight monsters would be amazing for the deck, even if it had no effect or a simple effect like a pop-on summon or a recursion effect or something. Zirconia, it can only carry the deck so hard despite being a monster from like 2011, and just having another target for those mediocre hands to be a little bit better would be fantastic. So the deck needs more combo starters overall, just regarding the Gem Knight cards. So a retrain of or a new card to replace Gem Armadillo would be great. Like, on summon, adding a gem spell or trap, and a Gem Knight normal monster, and then maybe having a secondary effect revolving around the normal monsters, like banish it from the grave to special a normal monster from grave. Like, it seems pretty bloated in theory, but remember that your only targets for the first effect are like Gem Knight Fusion itself, Gem Enhancement, which is a card so mediocre I won't even mention what it does, and then Counter Gem, which is a pretty bad Crystal Beast card. Plus, adding a normal monster in addition isn't too crazy, and it would simply allow the deck to have a way to go into the 1-card small fusion of your choice, followed by using the reborn normal monster and the fusion to go into the Phantom Quartz, which can then climb into one of the diamonds using its fusion summon effect. Again, that does seem like a lot of advantage to give a deck on its own, but given that it's mainly restricted to Gem Knights, a deck with no real combo starters to begin with that's supposed to be going second, in a game where huge end boards make that difficult without the help of generic cards in your hand, I don't think it's too far-fetched to give them the help, though likely with Lady Lapis getting the axe. So for the next point, I'm going to be referring to the main playstyle of Gem Knight, being like the OTK going second build. I think they could use a good blowout card. Like, I'd hate to bog the archetype down with so many new fusion monsters, but a third big boss monster that requires 3 like the OG diamonds that say on summon blew up the opponent's monsters would be pretty damn great, and on the surface that may seem pretty cracked with Brilliant Fusion, but keep in mind that Brilliant Fusion turns the stats to 0, and requires a spell discard in order to make it whole again, and being in a going second deck, they need strong blowout options in order to keep up with the opponent's end board. If I had to give it another effect, maybe something a bit more interesting, like allowing it to remove itself from the field, to summon back a different fusion from your grave, so you could like summon back a Master Diamond for its stat boost, or of course Lady Lapis Lazuli from our previous turn to chip that last bit of damage away with Burn. And my final point for fixing Gemini is very simple. Ban Lady Lapis Lazuli. Yes, I know the entire point of the video was showcasing the FTK, but the big problem with the archetype comes from the existence of the FTK. Because of it, Konami becomes too afraid to give the deck any support that doesn't have like a million restrictions, such as Gemini Quartz, or the newer, I think it's called like Scatter Fusion. It's so bad. When you look at Scatter Fusion, Quartz, and Rose Diamond, you can tell they don't want the deck to have any going first potential, nor to use cards outside of their own archetype, but I don't think that's fair at all. Like, yeah, going second Lapis is really cool to pull a Cowboy for game, but I don't think any going second Gemini players are going to miss it too much. Similar to how most Gemini players weren't going to miss Seraphonite while Brilliant Fusion got banned for its sins. So yes, while getting rid of Lapis would destroy the FTK build, it would grant Konami a huge amount of leniency to create newer, better support for the deck, and allow the deck to play more fun and less gimmicky options by being able to drop things like stupid Black Garden. But what more do I have to say about Gemini? So Gemini is one of those decks that holds a really close place to my heart, because, again, Gemini Zirconia was like one of my first fusion monsters, and then Gemini was one of the main decks that I actually tried building. It was literally the first deck where I had a coherent theme in mind, being mainly being fusion, but I had more Gemini cards than anything when it came to my fusion cards. And so, literally, I looked at this deck and I made some weird Fluffle Gemini Shaddoll hybrid build, and there was like, I think Elemental Hero Prisma and stuff as well. It was like a big fusion mashup build, but that was like the first deck that I actually started taking deck building seriously with. Like, take that with a big grain of salt there. But like, it was when I actually started trying when it came to cohesive themes, and like, Gemini is just such a special deck for me because it just reminds me so much of when I was a kid. I would honestly love to see the deck actually get good and new support without having to rely on the FTK holding it back from getting that. And as someone that played something like Fluffle and Dinosaur and a bunch of other decks that like to go second, seeing a good OTK build of Geminites with new support that would help them do so, that would just be awesome, especially if Brilliant Fusion came off the list because of that. I think that the deck honestly has some serious potential if they did some of the things that I mentioned here, and probably a little bit more in the next wave of support if they get any copium, just big huff of copium there. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please be sure to leave a like, as well as put this video and the channel into TG recommended. And if you like this content and want to see more like it, like the rest of my Sleeper Sunday series, I do one every single month on these fun hidden decks that you may not know about, then perhaps consider subscribing, because it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Remember that for my Sleeper Sundays, I will be posting a poll on my community tab on YouTube with a few different deck options for what to use for the next episode, but it'll only be up for up to 24 hours maximum every month at the end of the month, so be sure to pay attention when it's up if you want to get your vote in. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.